Hello, everybody. My name is Angela VIORA, and I'm here from Narm, Melbourne, Australia. Thank you for having me, Sarah and Karen, at your conference, and thanks for all the participants to listen for listening to this presentation of mine. As I said, my name is Angela. I'm a lecturer in European languages, Italian studies at Monash University. I'm very sorry I cannot be there in person with you today, but I'm gonna be here with you virtually, at least. We have learned how to do that. So before starting, I'd like to acknowledge the elders and traditional owners of the Kulin nations on which lands Monash University operates and on which I currently live, work, and do my life and do this presentation as well. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I am a privileged guest on these lands that were never ceded and certainly not to me. I also want to thank from really the bottom of my heart Sarah and Karen for having me, for keep doing the marvelous job they do, and also special thanks to Sarah because the work I'm going to talk about today wouldn't exist if it wasn't for her, and I'm going to tell you why. So this is the overarching question that I'm positing here in this presentation. How do we dwell and perform in context of migration, frontiers, colonizations, and encounters? So this is the performance I'm going to talk about today. It's called Body as the body, but also stands for the Bureau of Domestic Yearning. Is a performance for the camera. So it resulted in photo and video documentation, and I performed this work when I was here in Melbourne, in Australia, 2020, during stage 4 lockdown. And here comes Sarah because I created this performance as a response of her the great call she threw into the world, calling for performances done in the domestic space. So I was in Melbourne during lockdown, and I started thinking of my domestic space not only as a cage, but also as a place that was protecting me. And there was a new place I just moved in, and so through my body, I started exploring it physically. And then what started as an exploration of the place resulted in being an exploration of my body, and my body as an immigrant body on a temporary resident visa in a foreign land. But let's see what the video of the work is about, and so you will understand this better. First of all, before starting, here I'm going to use terms as migrant, immigrant, expat, temporary resident. I'm all of these. I've been performing through now I think 5 or 6 visas since I've been here in Australia over 8 years. And I'm going to explore through this work the body-place relationship. How? Um, by exploring issues of migration and mobility, migration and immobility. So the regulations, the law, the bureaucracy regulating how migrant bodies can cross or cannot cross borders and frontiers. I'm going to talk about bureaucracy as a place. I'm going to theorize migrant bodies as horizons. And finally, I'm going to reflect on permeable layers of dwelling. And I can do all these because, as you all know better than I do, practices like performance art, dance, they can really make visible the invisible. They can really raise awareness on issues of society, in this case migration, that maybe not everybody is aware of. And I believe that these practices can raise this awareness often better and in a more accessible ways than a book or papers. So let's see what this work is about. Oh no, sorry. First, let's clarify some concepts. So, body as soma. When I talk about body, I mean my whole persona, my physical body, my emotional body, my rational mind. So we have divided all these into different categories, but according to the ancient Greek idea of soma, the word somatic comes from there. We conceive of this, my whole persona, as a whole, but always in relation to a specific environment. So I also bring here in this body of mine the cultures, the languages I carry with me, and through which I cross borders, for example. Then I talk about dwelling, according to Martin Heidegger's idea of it. So it's not a mere occupation of space, but it's always an embodied, profound relationship, a mutual relationship with the surrounding. So this is a phenomenology perspective. So being in the place world. What does it mean in particular? Well, philosopher Idra Casey then talk about body in place. So wherever we are always somewhere with our own body. So there is a specificity in the relationship between body and places. And then I'm going to talk about bureaucracy as a place, in particular as atmosphere. I'm going to explain this better later on. Let's now think of that in terms of Doreen Massey's idea of space as a dimension of multiplicity that sees millions of stories of these bodies encountering, crossing each other. So there is depth, there is a network of relationships here. Finally, let's see, the video is 2 minutes video about this work of mine I'm going to discuss with you. There is a bit of nudity, nothing dramatic, I guess, but still, it's my duty to warn you, you're gonna see some nudity.
Hi, my name is Angela VIORA, and I'm an Italian performance artist and scholar based in Australia. Vulnerability is a value in my practice. Body, the Bureau of Domestic Yearning, is a series of performances for the camera. Body is an intimate exploration of the domestic space following the Melbourne lockdown, from my point of view as an expat and a temporary resident in Australia. The COVID emergency redefined body-space relationships and ideas of belonging, mobility, and migration. What can I or cannot call home, and why? When the pandemic started, I could not return to Italy and be close to my family because the borders were closed there. Now, I cannot leave Australia without the risk of being denied to return. The isolation during the lockdown has given me the opportunity to explore the place in which I live, and I often take for granted. I place my body in some domestic corners and spots of the house that I didn't consider or notice before. Through the shapes and lines of my body, I follow the domestic architecture in order to highlight it. I turn the domestic limitations into stimuli. It's a mutual activation and enrichment between the body and the house. Everything is precarious. I'm not sure whether my job contract will be renewed for next year, and I'm not entitled to financial aid here in Australia. I don't know when I will be able to travel back to Europe to visit my family, and for how long I will remain in this apartment that's now my shelter. I cannot unpack my belongings, settle down, and relax because of uncertainty. Performing at home has made me realize that my only certainty is my own body. This is my very first domestic space, yearning for ground in some way, longing for an external space to call home. My body is a portable home to dwell in ruthless lands. My body progressively vanishes to let the place emerge. Has my nebulous body finally merged with the house? Am I home? Or will I be forever a ruthless ghost?
So in the video, you can see that I move in the house to explore it, but also to find a spot where to stop and stay by trying to hold on to lines, shapes, lights, shadows, and line. It sounds paradoxical because I keep moving in order to find stillness and stability. Isn't this what migrants and expats always do? I apply Korea's lens of longing and belonging to understand the physical and metaphorical oscillation of my condition. Sharpness and blurriness, immobility and motion carry multiple significances because the condition that they represent is ambiguous. On one hand, movement and blurriness reflect the uncertainty of my status that the pandemic has exacerbated. As a temporary resident, I'm a guest in Australia. Legally, I don't fully belong here, and there are gaps between my duties and my rights, a condition common among migrants, albeit in various degrees and with different contexts. For example, the fact that immigrants often pay full taxes, but they have a reduced access to welfare system, for example. On the other hand, I'm stuck in precarity. The stillness of my body in space reveals the constant yearning coming from not belonging fully to Australia, yet being forced to remain, and being Italian but unable to go there. And also the feeling of not being fully belonging to Italy when I'm back there. It's something that often happens to expats after a long while they are overseas. So, in a second moment, the contours of my body progressively merge with the physiognomy of the hosting environment, trying to become one with it and belong to it by erasing borders. We all have a common set of rights when living in a country, but each of us does and performs according to our social and citizenship status. In Australia, for example, during the pandemic, legislation regulating mobility, condition of residency, and access to the healthcare system differed with respect to diverse passports and visas, although we were all stuck in the same place, so physically sharing, occupying the same portion of space. We might conceive of geographical territories and frontiers as more or less fixed points, and we certainly attempt to regulate them as such. Yet, our embodied human relationship with them is neither fixed nor defined, but subject to change, often in unpredictable ways at disparate times. I talk of permeable layers of dwelling. I propose rethinking bodies, in particular migrant bodies, at the mercy of precariousness as horizons. As such, they are always shifting and making themselves present through limits and distances, as well as horizons do. Like the liminality of horizons, my migrant yet stuck body has porous borders that absorb and blend, delimit yet blur and expand. My dwelling in Australia as an expat, as well as everybody's dwelling during the pandemic, has taken shape by means of limits, rules, borders, restrictions, curfews, kilometer radius, rights and duties. While performing body, the structural limits and architecture of the house made me aware of the limitations and the structural shape of my own body. This entire process triggered in me reflections on the material jurisdictional limitation and bureaucratic infrastructures of the land that determines my identity as a legislative subject. So, as I always say, I always have the same one body. Yet, according to the visa I'm on, I can do or cannot do certain things, different things, with this own body in place. Yet I'm still Angela. Whenever I go back to Europe because of my passport, my body in place, again, can perform differently. So there are gaps and fractures and discrepancy between the geographical frontiers and the bureaucratical limitation. Weight and pressure are two recurrent elements in my life as an expat. The weight of a visa and the pressure of first gaining it, and then maintaining it by complying to certain conditions. The weight of my passport to access some welfare services according to the reciprocal agreement between Italy and Australia. The pressure of being deserving of the opportunities that the host country provides me with. During the pandemic, we experienced the weight of legislative limitations put on our daily life and the subsequent pressure in coping with them. The similarities are clear as both atmosphere and bureaucracy affect and are affected by the environments that they permeate. They both determine the lived experience of all the inhabitants of the environments in question. Both bureaucracy and atmosphere are subject to fluctuations, are unseeable yet concrete, are made of a variety of distinguished yet combined elements. Let's go back to permeable layers of dwelling. I came to the realization of this concept while dancing. I was performing an Australian indigenous kangaroo dance with the Wurundjeri elder, Uncle Murundindi, and other people during a workshop in the Dandenongs in Melbourne in December 2021. Jumping up and down on the ground, I suddenly thought, who am I on this land? In which way do I belong to this land, if any? How am I dwelling on this ground? How do I occupy this space? My body was bouncing and I wasn't sure how to land on my feet. I twisted my ankle in the automatic attempt of landing back as softly as possible, almost apologetically, feeling like I had no right to step onto this soil. I wished I could remain suspended mid-air, avoiding to hitting the land. Much scholarship, art, and public discussion exists around being a non-Indigenous white Australian in Australia in relation to issue of heritage colonialism and exploitation. I'm aware of this, but my life experience is different. I'm neither a non-Indigenous nor an Indigenous Australian. I'm an immigrant, and thus I move on this land on different trajectories and substrata, knowing that I'm a privileged position because I actually have more rights, protection, and better opportunities than other immigrants, than asylum seekers and refugees, and of First Nation people themselves. Knowing all these increased my hesitation to step on this ground while dancing. Here we have the fantastic Uncle Murundindi of the Wurundjeri tribe, who led the workshop and taught us the kangaroo dance. So, to conclude, I aimed through this contribution to bring attention to the necessary work of body-based performance arts and dance into a world that needs enlightenment perspectives more than ever. I created Body as a personal response to living in lockdown in a country that is both domestic and foreign to me. Performing at home has led me to question where home is in relation to my residence status and my body as two dimensions that often do not match. The borders determining physical environments and bureaucratic landscapes overlap imperfectly, revealing cracks and divergences, in which my expat Surma dwells by performing multiple identities, none of which is exhaustive of myself. I yearn for belonging to what surrounds me at the point of vanishing. Or have I finally become one with the land on which I stand? I acquaint myself with the domestic space by using my body as measurement to eventually find out that this is not Eru at all, but my first domestic space, which I always inhabit and through which I perform on various visas and frontiers, on various layers of dwelling, on the ground upon which I stand, as well as in the atmospheric pressure of bureaucracy. My migrant body is a horizon, a mobile point of contact between dimensions. Well, this is all for me now. This is a list of the works cited in this presentation. In particular, I'd like to draw your attention to the very last one, Performing on Permeable Layers of Dwelling, in which I go deeper in this reflection, in this work I've just discussed with you, in this article published in Critica Cultura, just out and edited by Sarah. Thank you very much for your attention. This is my email address, angela.viora1@monash.edu. Please feel free to email me, reach out with your feedback and questions, and I would be more than happy to get in touch with you. Thank you. Grazie. Ciao.